What's up, Hokie Nation, and welcome into a special sit-down interview as Virginia Tech softball hosts Stanford in a top 16 matchup this weekend. We have Justin McLeod of D1 softball on set to break down the Hokies and the Cardinal, so let's get it rolling on this special sit-down interview at Tech Sideline. And we say welcome back to this special sit-down interview at Tech Sideline on Friday, March 28th, 2025 from our high-tech studios in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Let's introduce everybody on set. To my right is our Hokie softball guru, as I like to call him, Mr. Chip Grubb. Across the way is our honorary guest, the D1 softball associate editor, Justin McLeod. Behind the scenes is our director of media, Nick Brown. He is producing as always, and I am your host, Carter Hill. Justin, as always, we appreciate your time. Welcome to the set and welcome to Blacksburg for your first ever time. So glad to have you here.
I appreciate it. It's been fun. I've been here probably 16 hours and the scenery's gorgeous.
It's
gorgeous.
Well, there is quite a lot going on in college softball this weekend. And the one thing I wanted to hit on is Virginia Tech and Stanford. Why this series? Why are you here in Blacksburg?
Honestly, well, again, first time I've been to Blacksburg, so that's always a piece for me that I look at. But I think this series maybe isn't getting all of its flowers. So you got Tennessee at Oklahoma this weekend, obviously a huge series. South Carolina's down at LSU, a huge series. I've done a lot of SEC already this year. But I look at this series and I'm like, Stanford's on the East Coast. This series, I think it's a little under the radar a little bit. And I think it has the potential to be I think it's got the potential to be a pretty special weekend. Like, I think the series could go a lot of different directions. And so, I mean, when I was deciding, I was like, you know what? Worth being there for.
So Justin, I did a preview this weekend of Stanford and against Virginia Tech. And Stanford is a very, very good softball team. Somebody actually commented, how did they end up being ranked below Virginia Tech? Because you look statistically, they are really good. Did they start off the year ranked lower because of the loss of Najee Kennedy, or what do you see from your seat?
I think certainly there's that piece in the offseason where when you lose a pitcher like Najee Kennedy, it's like, okay, what's the team going to be? What's the team going to be made of? What are you going to look like? What's your pitching going to look like? All these different things. I think that's definitely there in the offseason. Coming into the season, you kind of have to take that out of the picture. You kind of have to say, okay, she's not there anymore, so you can't. It's not who's not there; it's who is. The thing for me with Stanford, when you talk about top 25 rankings in the preseason, I really didn't know what they were made of. That's an offense last year that wasn't great. They were adequate, and they certainly made the Women's College World Series based on more than just Najee Kennedy, but they weren't just a great offense. The pitching was my biggest question mark. Like, without Najee Kennedy, you had a lot of unproven pitchers. You had a lot of so-so pitchers just strictly based on the numbers that had happened at that point. Coming into the season, Virginia Tech, you knew you had Emma Limley. You knew what the offense was made of. Even the pieces that were lost after last year to graduation or whatever, you still knew you had the pieces. You had the Limleys, the McMillans, the Chatfields, whatever else. So I think coming into the season, there's certainly that piece of, okay, well, more question marks about Stanford than Virginia Tech. As the season goes on, too, then you have to look at things like strength of schedule as a metric is one thing, but the actual who they're playing. And I look at who Stanford played the first few weeks. It was teams that maybe aren't supposed to be, or that they're supposed to beat, air quotes. Virginia Tech played some really tough opponents. So I think it took a few weeks for Stanford to really say, okay, actually, they're worth something. This is not a fluke. It's not just the teams they're playing. They're a good team. To see that offense retooled as it is and how good they looked. And now I think that's why you're seeing Stanford climb. But I think that's also why through the first part of the season, you've seen the difference between Virginia Tech and Stanford, even though numbers-wise, they're probably pretty close.
Can we actually back up real fast? Because, Chip, I know you were the one that set this up, and you guys have known each other for a little bit. So when did you all first come in contact with one another, and what's kind of y'all's background with one another?
So I actually met Justin, I had just taken on the Tech softball beat, if you will. And I think I met you at Clearwater.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And we hit it off, and we have kind of just kept in touch ever since. Yeah. Justin's got a tremendous background in softball. I mean, I think it's been 15 years.
Yeah.
And for those that are interested in looking at the entire softball picture, D1 softball is about as good as it gets. They've got a ton of writers. They put out a ton of content. Not saying this because he's sitting here, but it's a lot of good stuff.
Appreciate it.
So Really good stuff. We appreciate their coverage. And I actually put a note on the message board today. Having Justin here in Blacksburg when he could have been, at some of these tremendous big headline type games, that's almost like Sports Center for football. I mean, we got the man here, so we're glad to have you.
No, I appreciate you. I think it was in Clearwater that you and I first met. I think it had to be. Gosh, that's probably been 4 years now.
Yeah, I think
it's gotta
so.
Be. This is my 14th season doing college softball, and this is only the 4th or 5th year that I travel like I do. But 14 years doing college softball, first time in Blacksburg. I've been aiming to get here, to be fair. It just hasn't worked out to this point. I'm always somewhere, and I hadn't quite made it, but I finally made it. So
Blacksburg's not easy to get to.
It's not. I actually, so I drove up yesterday. I was coming from Athens, Georgia, and I had done a game at Georgia on Wednesday night. And so I'll just drive up, looked at it. It's like 5.5 hours. I'm like, it's easy drive for me these days. Used to be an hour and a half was an easy drive. Now 5.5 is an easy drive. But I'm driving up. I didn't actually even realize I was in the state of Virginia. I was driving up, and I saw the exit numbers, and I'm like, oh, that says exit 2. Huh, I must be in Virginia by now. Had no clue. I just was just driving straight up, going through the Blue Ridge Mountains, I guess it is. Man, I was like, it's gorgeous country, exactly what I was promised.
Yeah.
Just driving straight up, and here I am.
Well, we're glad you're here. What do you see as kind of the keys to this weekend series? What are you looking for?
So I think the thing that headlines for both teams is the offense. Stanford's offense is completely retooled, completely rejuvenated. If you look at that offense, that's a really good hitting team, Stanford is. Virginia Tech, that's been their hallmark. Like, that's not new for Virginia Tech. So both offenses are really good. To me, I think the key this weekend could be the pitching. Because for Virginia Tech, you've obviously got Emma Limley. That's your headliner. And I think anybody who looks at the two pitching staffs is going to say, okay, Limley is the number one of any of the pitchers here for this series this weekend. So on paper, you should think, okay, well, that's Virginia Tech wins that one. If it's even in the offense, the pitching, okay, bam, done. I think the thing about the pitching, though, for me is Limley, as good as she is, and the depth that Virginia Tech has, like, she's not the only one in the bullpen. But you have Stanford's pitching that, again, like I said, coming into the season, I felt was pretty unproven. I think they've looked solid. They've gotten the job done. They've done what they needed to do to win all these games. So on paper, it looks like a lopsided pitching matchup. I think the thing for me that's the key this weekend is what's on paper doesn't always hold. So is Stanford's pitching going to be, I don't want to say inferior by any means because they're not inferior, but is Stanford's pitching going to pale in comparison to the Limleys or the Mazarons or the Klymans of the world? Or is Stanford's pitching going to rise to the challenge? And to me, I think the pitching could be the key this weekend just because Limley, we know how good she is. We know how good Virginia Tech's depth is. We see what Stanford's pitching has done to this point and how they've gotten the job done maybe without expectations. They've risen to an occasion we weren't sure they could rise to. I think to me, the pitching actually could be the key this weekend.
Cool. Were you acquainted or did you know of Coach DeMore before he came to Virginia Tech when he was at Kennesaw?
Yeah. So I actually go back to Missouri when he was on staff at Missouri.
Okay.
That staff back then, Missouri was very good. And again, kind of snuck under the radar, which I feel like has kind of been Pete's thing through his career. Like he's not big. He's not a big headline guy. He's not a big in your face kind of guy. So, and that was the same thing at Missouri back then, in large part. So when he got to Kennesaw, I felt like that was one. I was like, okay, this could really be something here. The Missouri coaching staff had been together for a while. It's his first head coaching job at Kennesaw. Kennesaw had been good at Division II, moved up to Division I, had been okay. He gets to Kennesaw and right away, snap of a finger, Kennesaw's really good. They make the NCAA tournament, was it his second year? I think it was. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. And so I got to know Pete when he was at Kennesaw. Because I mean, in my job, you try to get to know everybody, like,
Sure.
And got to know him, got to know his style a little bit as a head coach, not as an assistant, because there's differences. And somebody's an assistant and a head coach, there's differences. Got to know his style a little bit. He had such great success at Kennesaw at that point, and then obviously gets to Tech, and look at Tech.
So what's your thoughts of the job that he's done here in Blacksburg? I think we might take him for granted, but
I think that's a fair thought, to be honest, just because I think he makes it look so easy. Like, he's been at Kennesaw, he won. Gets to Virginia Tech, guess what he does? He won. And I think the thing, too, because he's not a big headline guy, he's not a big in-your-face kind of guy, Like even, I mean, he was on this podcast, a week or two ago, whenever it was. Like he's kind of understated. I think that kind of lends itself to, I don't want to say take for granted, but lends itself to not necessarily being able to always pay attention to how good he's been or what he's done and all that. But if you think about, and not taking away from what Virginia Tech did before Pete, I mean, they made the World Series once upon a time. But since he's been here, the consistency with which Virginia Tech has won, the consistency with which they've improved. Like I look at the scheduling and I look at some of these games where maybe you play a couple of games against an SEC team early in the season. And maybe, early on, maybe those are 2 tight games. Well, maybe next year. Well, the next year, maybe you split those games. And the next year, maybe you win a couple of them, or maybe you beat a bunch or several Power 5. Like the progression, even in the midst of success, I think it's easy to miss that. But then you think about the postseason appearances and you think about the talent that's come in and things like that. I think Pete's done a heck of a job since he got here, to be honest. The consistency to me, the consistency and the progression are the 2 things that I think are the most impressive, because the consistency to win at that level, that often, hard to do. Hard to do. And then just the progression in the midst of that consistent success, also hard to do. And yet somehow Tech's been able to do it since Pete got here.
From an outsider and a national perspective, what are your thoughts on Virginia Tech's ability to host this year, especially if you win the series this weekend? Right. You still got Cal coming up, Florida State down the road, but like if Virginia Tech can take care of business this weekend, do you like Tech's chances to host come May?
I think they're in a good spot too. You got to take care of business against those big teams, because that's the thing that's always going to, when it comes to tournament decisions and things like that, the big wins always factor in.
Sure.
So you got to take care of business in those games. The way Tech looks, I think there's a very good chance they could. Don't get me wrong. So you got to do it, but I think there's a good chance Tech can do it. Outside of that, the hosting bubble, as we call it this year, is very interesting. There's room to be had in my mind. Teams that maybe haven't hosted the last couple of years. Obviously Tech did, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago. But maybe didn't host last year. It's not an automatic rollover of the 16 teams. There's room to be had there. I think there's some, on that hosting bubble, I think there's enough room. I think Tech's in a good spot. I think right now, if the season ended, you're probably in that last few spots that I think, okay, because, an Oklahoma and a Texas and a Florida, okay, they're locked in. Like they're going to host. We all know that. Handful of others probably close to that, if not there. And then you've got the ones that I'm like, okay, look at resumes, things like that. I like Tech's resume. At this point. And the thing to me is, and I was actually going over some numbers this past week. The thing about Tech to me that I think is interesting, all of their losses, they redeemed. All of the teams that beat them, they also beat. And I think that's key, because, the one loss that I think maybe is the quote unquote biggest stain, it's not really a stain, is the Villanova loss. But then you look, they had just beaten Villanova.
They run rule.
Right. So it's like when you get into that room and the committee's deciding, hosting, things like that, I think that's something that's not necessarily a metric that probably also works in Tech's favor when time comes.
You were, Chip, talking about the national perception of Pete DeMoore. What about the national perception of Virginia Tech softball? We just talked about them hosting this year, but your lens, I mean, we see it differently here in Blacksburg and around the program and the team and at the games. But from a national standpoint, how do you view Virginia Tech softball's program? You talked about consistency, but beyond that, how do you view Virginia Tech's program?
So I think the thing, anybody generally who looks at it, you see the offense, you see the home runs. Like, I think that's the first thing people see. To me, I go back to that progression in the midst of success that I said a minute ago. That to me is the first thing that stands out, because that's not something you get even at all of your big time programs. So I look at Virginia Tech and I see where Virginia Tech was when Pete DeMoore walked in, what the talent was, just where Virginia Tech softball was at that point. I look at the success, I look at the wins, I look at the postseason appearances, all that kind of thing. But then I also look at Virginia Tech has gotten better every year. And that's something that's hard to do, but that tells me Virginia Tech is doing what they need to do. So like, you think of a Florida State. Florida State's been a national championship contender for how long with Lonnie Alameda there? Sure. For a long time. Texas and Oklahoma, Florida, they've been around for a hot minute. The thing for me is I look at where Virginia Tech is, and honestly, I can compare it to a Duke or a Clemson, because again, they're kind of on that same upswing in the last several years because their programs are brand new. I look at Duke; they make the World Series last year. I look at that progression they had, and I see Virginia Tech very similarly. Granted, I get it; Tech hasn't made the World Series in this progression under Pete, but I look at Tech and I see a very similar progression upward. I see improvements in different areas. I see, honestly, sometimes I look and I'm like, okay, it's an offense that hits a lot of home runs, but they don't just hit home runs. It's an offense that brings in talent, and that talent develops over the years versus just being stagnant. So I think on the national picture, I think Tech's in that position, even though Pete DeMoore's been here for however many years, it's been now 6, 7, whatever it is. Math is hard. I was a words guy
I
in school.
I understand.
But, since I see that progression and all that, and I look, and I think they're doing what they need to do. They're in that group of programs that's continually improving. I had somebody tell me last year that, looking at a regional or super regional pairing, Virginia Tech was the team they did not want to face. Like it was looking at possibilities, maybe there's 3 or 4 who might show up or whatever. Virginia Tech was the team they did not want to face because of what Tech could do.
Sure.
And don't get me wrong, you can say that about plenty of teams. I mean, nobody really wants to play Oklahoma. Nobody really wants to play Florida State kind of thing. Right. But the fact that Tech is in that group, I think 6, 7 years ago, Tech wasn't in that same category. It was, Virginia Tech's here. They're in the postseason. Okay, great. Well, now it's like Virginia Tech's not a team I want to face in the postseason. And I think that difference is one of the top things that from a national picture, from an overall bird's eye view, that's one of the things that I look at the most is just how that progression has gone over the last few years and really hasn't stagnated. Like it's continued.
I love how you say Tech too. I love how he says Tech, Somebody will come on here. And Virginia Tech's great, but like Tech. I love it. So
I was talking to Chip last night and I was referencing Texas Tech and a series that I had done a couple of weeks ago and I kept saying Tech and I had to correct myself. I was like, wait. Texas Tech did this.
Texas Tech. And you were at Georgia Tech on Wednesday?
Tuesday night. Yeah, there's a lot in there. So normally the vernacular, I do have to throw the teams in there, but I don't think anybody, I think everybody here, when I say Tech, we know Virginia. So I was like, I'm just rolling right with it. I'm right with you on this one.
What you were talking about driving into Virginia and not realizing you were in Virginia, I can almost guarantee you're at the point where if you said Tech, everybody's like, oh, Frank Beamer. Because like literally that is Frank Beamer country. Yeah. He is from there. So, but yeah, that's awesome.
So Justin, let's switch gears just a little bit because you obviously have a feel for the entire country when it comes to softball. So we've got the pending settlement coming up in April, supposedly. This week, the Virginia Tech AD talked about the $20 million or so, and he said, we see it as putting 75% to football, 15% for men's basketball, 5% for women's basketball, and then 5% for all the other sports.
Correct.
Would you say that is pretty typical across the country? What are you hearing from some of the other schools and things of that nature?
I think that's pretty close to what it's going to end up being from a lot of your major schools. I mean, we all know football drives the bus.
Sure.
Like from a revenue perspective, from a notoriety perspective, football drives the bus, and you have to be successful in football. You can't just have a football team. You got to be successful for that bus to keep going straight ahead. Like we all know that's how it is. Whether it's TV deals or wherever the money comes from, we all know that's where the money comes from. The vast majority of whatever each school designates, of the vast majority they designate is going to go to football. That's going to happen. And I think 75, anywhere from 70 to 80, 85 maybe even in some places, is probably going to be pretty standard for to go to football. Also from a volume perspective, like you have a lot of football players. Sure. So like you've got to you got to have more money to spread around to where everybody gets more roster size and all that kind of stuff. Men's basketball is going to follow that because the NCAA tournament and the revenue that comes in from that that's the thing everybody can count on. If you make the NCAA tournament, you can count on the money from the NCAA tournament. I think it's close to $1 billion if I'm not mistaken. Sure. That gets spread around, and then the tournament units based on how far they go and whatever else. Women's basketball is now in that camp for the first year this year where they're going to have the revenue units and things like that from the tournament, but that's got to have time to grow.
Right.
So
absolutely.
Men's basketball is still going to get the second largest piece of the pie because from a revenue perspective, and that's what it all goes back to is the money, is the revenue. Sure. And then women's basketball is going to follow that. I think you're going to see some rare exceptions in places where maybe the percentages are a little lower. Like I could see some Big Ten schools. Maybe the football number is close to that, but maybe they spend a little more on volleyball, for instance, because the volleyball in the Big Ten is such a high dollar, high level thing. Okay. Some of your, I'll call them niche sports in certain places, like a wrestling, like a softball at Oklahoma, maybe gets a little bigger piece of the pie for that specific school because their program is so good or for whatever other reason. But I think that split's going to be pretty close to what it's going to be. And I think that's going to be, I think it's just going to be, I don't even want to call it an unfortunate reality. I think it's just going to be the reality. I mean, would you love for an All-American softball player to make a good chunk of that money? Sure you would. But when you look at where the money's coming from, you kind of also got to put
Sure.
the money towards that.
Sure.
So I think that split's probably going to be pretty close to how it goes nationwide, honestly.
So, in a related note, part of that settlement will also be the number of softball scholarships. So today it's 12. The Clemson AD came out a couple months ago and said they plan on fully funding up to the 25. You can see maybe Florida State's close. I don't know where Virginia Tech is. Haven't heard that. Honestly, my gut tells me we're probably at 15 or 16 if we're lucky. Do you have any feel what the general gist of that's going to be across? Will Pete have, let's say he gets 16, and I don't know that he does,
right.
But is he going to have 16 scholarships going up against a Clemson or an Oklahoma that's got 25? Do you have any feel for that at all?
I think you're going to have a handful of schools that on the softball side maybe get to 25. It's going to be a handful. It may be for other reasons, like it may be they fund that because they're not funding another sport or because they want to make sure they're even in men's and women's sports, whatever the reasoning. I think you may have a handful of schools. I don't think it's going to be a lot, actually, that get to that 25 number in softball. Okay. I think what you're largely going to see from the people that I've talked to and the things that I've heard at this point, because some schools still don't even, they haven't even said, which blows my mind where we are at this point, but some schools don't even know for sure where their scholarships are going to be. I think, though, what you're largely going to see is a lot of schools in that 18 to 22 camp, raised from the 12 you have now, and what I call doubling the roster. So, like, you can put 9 players on the field at any point in time. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the bigger time schools maybe get up to the 18, 20, 22 to where you can have, your backups. If you want to put them on scholarship, you can fill out a pitching staff, whatever. But that 18 to 22 camp, I think, is where a lot of schools are going to fall. Just for whatever reason. It's not quite to the 25, but it's significantly more than what they have now. And I think, too, there's going to be some schools that take that because do you really want the pinch runner who maybe appears in 5 games in the year on scholarship? But at the same time, you think about a Texas A&M, they've got kids from Houston, from College Station, that are walk-ons that maybe they would not have offered if they had to put them on a scholarship. But those kids can sometimes be the life of a team.
Sure.
Like, and I've seen that. Like, I see some of these kids. I use A&M as an example because you think of all the traditions there. You take 3 or 4 kids whose parents and grandparents went to A&M, and they're in the traditions and all that kind of stuff. All the transfers you bring in are great. Sometimes those kids who are there as walk-ons and all that kind of stuff can be the life of your team. So I think there's going to be some coaches, honestly, who embrace having a little bit of fluidity in there. In terms of what the roster size are, and then in terms of what their roster limits are, and then in terms of what their school scholarship allotment is.
What is to that point, and I'm genuinely curious about this. What is the NIL scene in college softball like as a whole, especially at schools like Florida State, Clemson, that Virginia Tech is directly competing with? Obviously, your SECs are going to have a little bit more, but Florida State, Clemson, Virginia Tech is probably in that next threshold in the ACC, as we were kind of touching on. But what is the NIL level and the NIL scene like in college softball as a whole? So
when NIL came on the scene, obviously college softball wants to jump on it, right? Like the athletes that you have great talent, you have big time programs. So Nigel Kennedy going to Texas Tech last year out of the transfer portal. It's been pretty widely documented, the size of the NIL offer that she had there. Reports have been in 7 digits. That's not standard for softball. That's not standard for college softball. There have been some players who've gotten offers in the 6 digits and have taken those. The more standard NIL tends to check in more. What I see a lot more is businesses, business people, whatever it is, their hometown team, they want to put some money into it. And so they'll put, like, there may be a player over here that makes $25,000. It's not a ton of money. It's not life-changing money. But for a college kid, $25,000. And a lot of times it's not even an enticement. I know people talk about it, and in some cases it absolutely is. But in college softball, 90% of the NIL, 95% of the NIL is not actually an enticement out of the portal or a recruit or whatever else. There are people who do that, legal or illegal, NCAA rules-wise, whatever. But 90% of it tends to be this business person, hey, this pitcher's great. And sometimes it's we want her to stay. Sometimes it's she's great, we don't want her to transfer. How's the $25,000 NIL offer come, be in a commercial for my ice cream shop or whatever it is. I've got the money, here you go, kind of thing. That's a lot of what we see from the NIL landscape in softball and college softball. You've got some that NIL wise, the big names, the big schools, bigger deals, higher profile deals, which usually means more money added to it. But a lot of the NIL scene in college softball is on your local level. It's your hometown team. It's your or an LSU or a Florida, where Baton Rouge is all about LSU and Gainesville is all about Florida.
Sure.
And if the softball team is really good, which LSU and Florida are, kind of thing, people want to give the players, like they can now. They want to support the players. Hey, here's $5,000 or $1,000 or $10,000 or an affiliate deal or whatever it is. That's a lot of what the NIL space is in softball. And by virtue of that, the NIL space in softball has expanded because you don't have the big dollars. It's not limited to you got to hit 20 home runs and you got to throw 10 perfect games or whatever else. It's lower scale, so it's wider spread. So the NIL space actually has done pretty well for college softball. We're not talking about anybody raking in millions upon millions of dollars, but there's a lot of kids who've been able to benefit from it on a different scale.
So the portal space too, and I think, was it me and Nick talking about this yesterday? We're in the era, obviously, where the portal is very predominant in a lot of sports. We are in the phase where men's and women's basketball players are transferring in and out left and right. Football, obviously, the portal is going to open in a couple weeks. We'll see guys leave for spring football, yada, yada, yada. Virginia Tech only took in one transfer this past year. My question to you is the transfer portal nearly as predominant, to, I guess, just for lack of a better term, in college softball compared to some of these other sports where we're seeing, for lack of a better term, people jump ship left and right compared to what Virginia Tech lost? Was it 4 or 5 transfers last year? Was it even that much?
Yeah, there were. I think in Virginia Tech's case, I think some of it was directly related to playing time, whatever. Yes. And I think Pete does a good job in the season meetings telling that player what it looks like going forward.
Sure.
And Tegan Thrunk, good contributor,
at NC State,
but she wanted to start.
Sure.
And gosh, look at Tech's lineup. Okay, look at Rachel Castine, Annika Rose, Jordan Lynch. She was going to play, but not a lot. Well, now she's at NC State and she's playing every day, starting and doing great.
Doing well.
So I think Pete needs to get some credit for being honest with his players on what the future holds. But I think you raise a good point, Carter. It seems to me like in basketball in particular, some of the mid-majors and smaller schools almost are a minor league for the big boys to come in and throw big bucks at them to come to our school for $200,000.
Sure.
Justin, it sounds like that's not quite that bad in softball. I mean, you might have a mid-major pitcher that's really good. What would you say is kind of and I know this is probably an unfair question, the kind of going rate to transfer?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Great question.
There's not one, is the honest answer. Sometimes there are, and that's where that whole 5 or 10% of the ladder that I was talking about with the NIL, with the enticement piece, where it does come in. A lot of times, though, what I see is a big time school who offers the visions of grandeur and then throws some coin after that. The enticement of the NIL does happen, it absolutely does happen, but it's not as rampant as you see as the headliner in other sports. Okay. Like you mentioned in basketball, I see reports, I'm not a basketball insider here, so I don't know that space as well, but I see a ton of reports about, the offers this, the offers that, this amount of money, whatever.
There's 6 digits, right? Solid 6 digits,
right? You don't have that as much in softball. You do have it. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It's not as rampant. A lot of what I see is somebody playing in a mid-major, whether it's a pitcher or a hitter or whatever, playing in a mid-major, and they're great. They're a really solid player. And they step back and maybe somebody makes a phone call it poaching, whatever you want to call it, but they see the visions of grandeur. They see the, what could be? I could play in the World Series, whereas at my mid-major, maybe not so much, that kind of thing. And then a monetary offer comes with that, follows that kind of thing. That's what I see more than anything else in college softball, which makes it more interesting because honestly, if you're offering a certain dollar amount, well, then I think everybody kind of understands why you take it, right or wrong. That can be debated till the cows come home. But I think that's kind of what people see first. Okay, dollar amount, don't like it, understand it. You're going to offer me $200,000? Well, I'm probably going to take $200,000. Like, I don't see that as much in college softball. There is money that's offered, but I see a lot of, okay, here's what could be. Here's what we could do. We want to bring you in visions of grandeur. And oh, by the way, we can pay you too. That's what I see more than anything, to be honest.
Interesting.
Is that coming maybe a little bit more with rev sharing now?
I think it's the opposite.
Okay.
I think there's possibility it actually lessens a little bit because the money's only going to go so far. And the one thing that I find very interesting to me personally, as much as professionally, is how rev share and NIL are going to go together. There's only so much money to go around. And I'm very curious how that's going to go. And again, there's not a lot of people who have even said they feel like they know how that's going to go, to be honest. And so as I sit there and I look at it, I really wonder where that's going to go for college softball. Rev share's got to get here. You got to get to that point. The scholarship limits, like you got to have the stuff signed. The house settlement's got to be done, which, I mean, supposed to be in April, probably not going to be in April in my mind, but we'll see what timeline it looks like. I really wonder what it's going to look like for college softball. There will still be money there because college softball it does well enough on television. It does well enough from an attendance standpoint, especially when the teams are good and the big dollar teams or the top tier teams. But the thing is, college softball doesn't really make a lot of money. Now, granted, what reason is that? Is it because a lot of parks don't charge, aren't big enough, don't charge, whatever the reason? It's not really a revenue thing at this point. Now, the World Series does well, college softball does well on TV, and there are programs who at least turn over some money. It's just not they're not rev positive is the difference. So I think there will still be money in college softball because of what the product of college softball has been, because of how the sport has grown, and kind of what I was talking about with Virginia Tech. It's college softball as a whole at the same time. That progression continues even in the middle of success. Like, that makes a difference. But I'm very curious how the financial piece of it's going to go in college softball when rev share and NIL either have to coexist or whatever that ends up looking like, because I could see it going a lot of ways.
That's good stuff. So you kind of made me feel a little bit better. You hear the stories about Naja Canaday and her $1 million deal or whatever. Sounds like she is very, very much the exception in terms of an exceptional talent and an exceptional rich oil man.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, and honestly, everybody has their thoughts on NIL. I get that. But for me, I had someone who told me a story. They brought in a transfer pitcher, and the pitcher was real good. Was going to be really good for them. Brought in a transfer pitcher, and the transfer pitcher didn't even, like, what wasn't after NIL money, wasn't part of the pitch or whatever, wanted to go to the school, and just kind of in the last, okay, we're getting all the arrangements set up, and just kind of asked, is there any kind of NIL? Is there any kind of whatever? And they had a donor who was willing to write a check because the player was good, was going to make a difference. But also, I think too, I don't think for the vast majority of college softball players, and one of the things that I love the most about writing about college softball, and this being my beat, that this is my sport, and the things that I still love about that after 14 years, you still have the vast majority of the players and the coaches and the people involved are still there because they love it. They're not getting rich at it. They're not. They are where they are. They're doing what they're doing because they love it. And I think there's still room in college softball for that. Even with the ones who get some NIL money, like that transfer pitcher, she got a check. She wasn't in it for the check. And I think that's a necessary distinction too, because sometimes I think you run into, especially in this day and age, you offer me $200,000, I'm going to go. Doesn't mean I want to be there. Doesn't mean it was my top choice. But if you offer me that kind of money, I'm going to go because of the money. That's one thing I still like about softball is even a lot of the players who get the NIL money, it's not a lot of money, to your point, 7 digits, even 6 digits are the exceptions. People, even the ones who get paid, they're still there because they love it. They make their decisions and, there's the money. Sometimes it's the money and, I like the place, but a lot of times I like the place and, there's the money. And I think that's still an element of softball in its purest form.
That might be the problem with collegiate athletics as a whole. The taking the money and I don't really care about the place, yada, yada, yada. That's a whole nother discussion. Yeah. But I'm glad you brought it up from a softball standpoint. So, Chip, is there anything else you want to touch on?
No, man, it's been enlightening, and certainly appreciate you coming in. Appreciate you coming to Blacksburg, number one.
Yeah.
But appreciate you giving us time on TSL.
It's good stuff. I appreciate you guys.
This has been awesome. Yeah. Enjoy TSP this weekend.
Yeah.
Hopefully the weather will be good. It should be. So
Your lips to God's ears.
I hope so. I hope so. So we appreciate you stopping by. Enjoy Blacksburg this weekend. And thanks, Justin. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
So for Chip Grubb, Justin McLeod, Nick Brown behind the scenes, I'm Carter Hill. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. And we'll talk to you very soon.